Morning, everybody. Welcome back. This is the last section of Unit 3. So, congratulations, we've done it. We went through the whole unit. And it was all done online. So, give yourself a pat on the back for that, too. What this means now is I know that there is a project for Unit 3, but I'm just going to let's pretend that it doesn't exist. What we're going to do is we're just going to do a written response and we're going to do a test. The test is going to be similar to the test that we did for Unit 2. So it'll be a Google Doc. You'll make a copy of it. You'll submit it to me when you're finished, but we'll worry about that next week. So today, after today's video, we'll be finished. So hopefully you've been following along. So this booklet should be done. If it is done, please send it to me. And then going forward, tomorrow, watch out for a video where I'm going to introduce your written response. So I'll introduce the written response tomorrow, and then I'll give you, obviously tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then Monday I would like to see that written response. Written responses being sent in. On Monday, I will hopefully have your unit test ready. I will post it on the announcement section, and then I'll give you Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday. I'd like to see that one coming in, because on Wednesday I'll start Unit 4. And I'll put all this in the announcement section because I realize I haven't been really utilizing that as well as I should be. I've really mostly been hoping that you've been watching these videos to get up-to-date information, but maybe you haven't been watching them. But then again, if you haven't been watching them, you're not really listening to this announcement anyways. So that's what the next few days are going to look like. So look out for a video tomorrow outlining how you are to do your written response. So there's that. If you have any questions, please email me. A lot of you have been emailing me, which is fantastic. It's good to see that some of you are on top of things. For those of you that aren't emailing but still doing stuff, good job too. For those of you that aren't, well, there's still lots of time, so don't worry about it. Just make sure you start. Anyways, enough of an introduction. This is student activity number 25. Perspectives on sustainability and prosperity in a globalized world. So these last few days we've been talking about the idea of sustainability, about prosperity, really looking at the future, because the way that we're living our lives now, it won't work out in the way that in terms of sustainability for the future. Today is actually really it's a good day to be doing this sort of stuff today, because today is Earth Day, for those of you that did not know. So today has been, I think it's the 50th Earth Day. It's been going on for 50 years. And it's just a day to make aware of climate change, of sustainability of the world. Because we are living in a globalized world. Here's the thing. We're not going back. We are going forward. And we will continue to go forward down this route of globalizing further. We're not going backwards. So we've got to figure out how to get the environment, our existence, our economies, and everything like that to mesh nicely together, still going forward. Because though at this rate, everything is still going forward, but some things are going to start to chip away and fall off, and some of those things are the environment. Yet on Monday we talked about, we use an example of the Alberta oil sands, and how polarizing they can be, how they can turn, they have two groups of people, the supporters and those against it, and it becomes quite serious when these two sides start to challenge each other. So we need to figure out how best to walk this very fine line for the future, because we're going to talk about sustainability in a globalized world, because like I said, we aren't going back, we are going forward. So I'm just going to go over a few things, review some key terms that you should know, especially for a test, and then also have them in your booklet as well. So what is sustainable prosperity? So this idea of sustainable prosperity, it relates to a few things. So it's in the future, obviously. And it all relates to this idea of stewardship, which we talked about before the Easter break. So stewardship of the land and resources to allow future generations an equivalent lifestyle to our own. So right now, when we look outside, we see houses. Maybe you live in a house, maybe you live in an apartment. Eventually, you're going to want to have your own place to live, be it a house or an apartment. You're going to want to have a car, I assume. You might have multiple cars. You want to be able to travel, go overseas, by plane. I would assume by plane. Boats take a long time. So that lifestyle that you're living right now, and you'll be living in the future, it's great. And some people have been really living it up these last few years. But if we were to all live these lives where we all own a house, we all own a car, we all travel constantly, we won't have enough resources to go on in the future. So, and those people who come in the future will not have an equal lifestyle to what we've been living. So we've got to figure out how to essentially put aside some stuff for the future generations. And those future generations are you and your children. So it is something that it is close to home for some of us. But like we see, some people are a lot of people like to live in the now, not really thinking about the future. So this idea of stewardship is really important. Trade is also important. We talked about trade before the break. Allow equal access to resources by liberalizing trade, making it easier and allowing developing nations to develop economically. So we talked about trade and liberalizing it. That just means taking away the restrictions, taking away the barriers, and allowing these countries who are developing to develop their economy so that they do not necessarily have to live off of the aid of other countries. They can stand on their own 2 feet and start to develop themselves. We've seen success stories in places like India and China and Japan and Brazil. These places at one time were very much dependent on the developed countries, and now they are developed to a point, obviously, where they can stand on their own and actually contribute to the economies of the world. So these are some success stories. The United Nations uses the term sustainable development to incorporate both ideas. So this idea of stewardship and liberalizing trade. So sustainable development means development that meets the needs of the present, but also in consideration, it also considers the needs of the future generations. So it's a mixture of both. Yes, we need to live now. And for some people, living right now is very, very difficult. Their lifestyles, their standard of living is quite low based on the economy of whatever country they're living in. However, we must also look at the future. So the people who are living and struggling now need to be taken care of. Because for some people, life is good. And we're talking about millionaires and even people who are not necessarily millionaires, but they live a very comfortable life. There are people who do not. So we need to find a way where everybody is living in a more equitable way. So meeting all of their needs. So I'm not saying equally, I'm saying equitably. So it means it meets everybody's needs. So things like education and healthcare, these sort of things are important for everybody, and they should be something that everybody has access to. But then sustainable development also says that, hey, now is good, but what about in the future? Because we still need to take care of the future. We still need to have an eye into the future to see what can we do, or are we burning up so much now that in the future we won't have anything left. It's something that we need to take into consideration, definitely. So sustainability, prosperity, sustainable prosperity, and global independence. So there is some pushbacks and there can be some difficulties when economic development clashes with political or social issues. So an example here is movement of manufacturing will increase the standard of living in other countries but may reduce the standard of living in others. So I'll give you, so that's a very dry example. I'll give you some meat to it. What it's saying is, imagine a developing country has to lower its standards. So we talked about the race to the bottom to get companies to come in, these multinational corporations. They're lowering the standard of living because they have to, regulations about healthcare, chemical disposal, the environmental things. They're lowering these standards to let these companies come in and make it cheaper for these companies to work in their country. That will lower the standard of living in these countries because you're lowering the wages of a person, of a factory worker. So that means that they make less money and they can't really buy a whole lot and support their families. You're going to lower the environmental standards so that if this company has a lot of waste products like chemical waste or anything, you're saying, you could just throw it in the river. It's okay. That pollutes the river, pollutes the ecosystem around there. So fish or plants or even just the water to drink becomes contaminated. Standard of living goes down. So these sort of things. There are issues when the economy clashes with political or social issues. So when we first met, and I talked about economic development and human rights, that was one of the very first things that I talked about. This is the thing it's talking about. When these two things come into conflict, who wins out? What is most important for us as a species on this planet to think about? So that is where difficulties come because for some people the economy is quite important. Obviously, we need an economy to live. That's just the way that it is. Here's a fun fact. You may not know this. You need money to live. That was me being ironic, by the way. So you need to be a part of this economy. But at the same time, you may have differing opinions when it comes to, say, social issues or political issues. The pipeline from Alberta to BC, we saw Indigenous groups come into conflict with this economic development because it clashed with their social issues. That is their land. It could contaminate their water sources, etc., etc. So it is something to keep in mind, and it is a very serious point when we talk about living in a globalized world and this idea of sustainability. There is a very good documentary on Netflix, and if we were in class, I would have showed this to you because I showed it while I was in Edmonton, and it was really good. And it talks about people in Peru, indigenous people who live in the Amazon, clashing with their government because their government is trying to go into their land and take the oil that is underneath the forest, and it disrupts their traditional way of life. So it's not just a Canadian thing; it's all over the world. Indigenous issues are very much at the forefront when we talk about this sort of stuff. And if you're really curious about this, let me know, and I can send you the names of some documentaries that are on Netflix. So if you have a Netflix account, you can watch them. They're very well done and they're very interesting. And what's really good to know is that these are things that are happening in our world in your lifetime right now. So enough about that. Let's go and we're going to talk about measures of prosperity. So money versus happiness. So we introduced this idea of the GDP before we left for the break. So that's gross domestic product. So it describes the value of all the goods and services produced in a country. So it's used to measure the size and health of a country's economy. So we use GDP to rank countries. The better your GDP, the better your country is, or the healthier your country is. Income and standard of living are tied to GDP, so the higher the GDP, the higher standard of living. So it's not necessarily 100%. It's not necessarily the best way of measuring, because a country could have a really high GDP, like say the United States, for example. However, there are also a lot of people who live below the poverty line, and a lot of people who are homeless. So it's not necessarily the best way, because it doesn't necessarily capture everybody. So, like I said before, it's not. It includes all people in a country, even those who don't generate resources. So it can start to be affected by that as well. So this GDP is a measure of prosperity. The Human Development Index, so the HDI, uses various factors to determine the quality of life of a population in a country. So it includes average lifespan, access to education, access to healthcare, access to clean water, government corruption, average income, access to safe food. So again, just another way of measuring how a country is doing. Again, the higher your HDI, the better your country is. So it takes into consideration how long a person lives, and when that person is alive throughout their life, how easily are accessible are things like education, healthcare, food, water, and it looks at the government and its corruption and stuff like that. So it is another way of maintaining a close eye on how countries are doing. Fun fact, I looked this up before, the average lifespan in Canada is 80 years old. So that's pretty good. I looked at a few countries to see who had the best one. I don't remember who had the best, but you can look it up if you want. You don't have to though. Okay, slide 7. There's a 3-minute video. Canada's quality of life. You'll answer these 2 questions that go along with it, but we'll move on here. Here is a chart that outlines 50 countries and their overall ranking in income security, health, status, capability, and enabling environment. So it ranks them. So if you look, Canada's actually doing quite well. We're number 4. So that's awesome. Okay, but moving on. So have a look at that. It's important to have a gander. Okay, so there's other ways of measuring, and this first one here I brought up a few videos ago. So it's nice to know that it's here. Gross National Happiness, so the GNH index. It was developed in Bhutan by King Wangchuk, and it's based on Buddhist spiritual values. So it doesn't really take into consideration, how the economy is doing. It's more concerned about how happy people are, and they will gauge the country's happiness. So I will try to find a video. I remember I watched a video and I showed a video to a class based on this GNH index. So I'll try to find it, and I'll leave the link in the comments, or not the comments, the description, so that you can have a look at it too, because it's interesting. And maybe if you want, you can even think about how do you feel if that would be something that Canada should do, and if that'd be something that would be valid in your opinion. So there is the Genuine Progress Index, so the GPI. It measures sustainability, well-being, and quality of life. Its concerns like the environment are given more importance. So this GPI, it cares more about the environment, not necessarily how many goods are being produced in a country. So what choices are associated with sustainable prosperity? Prosperity tied to choice. How do individuals, communities, and nations decide what is the best path to take? So that's important, and that is probably one of the most difficult things for our generation and governments around the world, is how do you get everybody to agree on the same sort of path to go down? Because no matter what, there's always going to be pullback, and there's always going to be sort of this anger towards a decision by a certain group, because individuals all have choices. You all have choices. Whenever we were in school, you'd come to class, you all chose to wear the clothing that you had on. If we were to switch over to uniforms, say next year, we all decided that everyone at Bishop McNally was going to wear uniforms. For some of you, it would be like, meh, it's okay. Or some of you would be like, oh, that'd be really cool. But some of you be like, no, this is not cool at all. So that's just a very simple example of how it's really hard to get everybody on board. Now, when we talk about sustainable prosperity, you have a very, very big hill to climb, because you're thinking, okay, how can I get it so that everybody who's living right now has equal access to all these sort of resources that are present in the world? How do we make it so that everybody has a home to live in, a roof over their head? It doesn't have to be a house, it could be an apartment, whatever. How can we make it so that that exists, and then they have access to water in there, heating? I was gonna say air conditioning, but we don't need that here that much. Anyways, how do we make it so that everyone has access to transportation? Because if everybody has a car, that can really impact the environment. And then, not only that's not even the full story. The second thing you have to think of is, how do we make it so that in the future, countries and peoples have the same access? How can we make it so that in 100 years from now, everybody has access to a roof over their head? How do we make it so everyone has access to education, healthcare, a job? These sort of things. If we don't take care of it now, that may be a big question mark. So how do you get individuals, communities, and nations to all agree that, hey, this is what needs to happen? We talked about it yesterday with the Paris Agreement that was made in 2015. 2017, 2 years later, one of the biggest world economy, the United States, dropped out. These are things that an individual, the president of that country, made that decision for 300 and some million people. So these sort of things make this question so difficult. How can we get everyone to be on board? Because when we look at this goals of going into the future, we should be looking at things like hunger and poverty, and the lives of the extreme poor in our world. They're the ones at most risk, and it's not just in places, developing countries. They're also in countries that are developed. There are people in our city who are living below this, what's known as the poverty line. There are people who are known as working poor, people who have a job and who go to a Monday to Friday job, but don't have enough money to have a house, to have a car, to enjoy the luxuries of what we all have. So these sort of things exist in all areas of the world. So when we talk about sustainable, what was it called? Sustainable prosperity. These are the sort of things that we have to remember. And we've just been talking primarily about people. Now let's step back and look at climate and the climate crisis that we're living in, and sustainable prosperity. So climate change linked to drastic increase in the use of fossil fuels. So these fossil fuels are natural gas, coal, and oil. These three things are what we use every single day. Our houses are heated, natural gas. Our lights are turned on, electricity. We burn coal. Our cars, oil. So these sort of things we use on a daily basis. To create plastic, we use oil. We burn more if more people want to have that same standard of living that some of us have had for our entire lives. So increased concern as developing countries industrialize. So China and India, these massive centers of population. Put those two countries together, you have probably 3/7, almost half the world's population. And if these countries meet the same level of, say, the United States or Western Europe, and everybody starts to want to live the same sort of life that we're living in North America or Western Europe, we're going to have a serious problem, because the planet cannot sustain that. So it's a matter of, if some are here and others are here, it needs to be leveled out. So those who are living in a lot more luxury need to lower their standards to help those who are trying to get to a certain level to come up. If this industrialization increases, but this doesn't. If this doesn't drop and this can come up, and this stays here and this comes up to meet it, we could see as much as a 15 or 10 to 15 degree 10 to 15 degrees. Well, I just had a moment. Hold on. 10 to 15 degree Celsius. Sorry, there we go. I couldn't find that word. Increase in the next 20 years. So in the next 20 years, you're going to be in your 30s. Just a heads up. I'll be in my 50s. That is huge. We're talking about, if you look right now outside, I don't know what the temperature is right now. Let's say it's 5 degrees. It'd be 15 degrees right now. That is drastic. We're talking a huge impact to things like food development and stuff like that. The people most affected will be those in the developing countries, obviously, because they're attempting to try to get up, and all of a sudden we're being crashed down by a climate crisis. So it's something to be aware of. Such claims are often challenged. So there are people who would look at this sort of data and say, no, it's not true. It's fear mongering, or it's an attack by the media, these sort of things. But it's really not. The science is there. We've seen climate change and the impact it has, and it all links to development of different economies, and it doesn't at all address the idea of sustainable prosperity. So that is it for this unit. If you have any questions, please comment them or please email me. So please work on your booklet. Tomorrow, watch out for a video about how to do your written response. So I will walk through that with you. And then I won't do a video Friday, so I'll give you a chance to work on your assignment. Then you will, on Monday, I'll have your test ready, and then we'll do that. And then on Wednesday, we will do Unit 4, the last unit. So thanks for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you tomorrow. Well, not really, but I know I've said this joke so many times. I should probably stop, but it's whatever. See you later.